Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining in. Um, Today we have with us Mr. Sajid Aslam. Sajid is currently the global head of public sector. So a very, very important topic we've got to you. And it is not just public financial management, it is rethinking public financial management. And as Sajid is going to explain to you, um, public financial management is about mobilizing revenue, allocating public funds, making sure transparency of the spend of public funds, all that exists. But rather than stealing the thunder, I let the expert talk about it. So here we have Mr. Sajid Aslam. Do keep the session interactive, please. You have a questions dialog box to type your questions in. I'm sure Sajid is going to take adequate breaks in between to give an opportunity to you people to ask questions. So as many questions as you want. One more housekeeping notice: the slide deck is already uploaded. So those who want an access to the slide deck, they can download it from the handouts, and the certificates of participation after you've attended the session will automatically drop into your inbox. So without any further ado, I think every minute of this discussion is important considering the circumstances that countries like Pakistan and Sri Lanka are facing. I think let's hear from Sajid about this very important subject. So Sajid, over to you.
Thank you, Harun, and welcome to today's session, and very good afternoon. Rethinking public financial management. So the way we have structured this one, we will talk about on a very high level that what the public financial management is all about. And then we will review a report which published by ACCA in December 21 is the Rethinking Financial Management. It's a great resource that reflect that what happened during COVID-19, how governments have reacted or responded to the different needs, and what we have learned from that and what is the way forward. There are 21 recommendations. I encourage everyone to review the report in detail, but there is a certain summary or extract of the report which we will be using here. So just going back to going into the very basics of what the public financial management is all about. PFM refer to the set of laws, and yeah, we have to understand the like in a businesses when we talk about the financial management that is governed by the direction of the board of director. Shareholders sometimes set out a certain framework, and the rest is all about the local corporate laws and the accounting standards which are applicable there. But in case of PFM, there are set of laws and the rules and the systems and the processes which government define for the central government as well as for the sub-national governments like the provincial governments or local governments, or in some cases at a union level or a city level. So there are different structure of the government which exist across the globe, and this PFM is relevant to any kind of government, or a component of it is definitely relevant to those part of the government. And that's also cover the part of the public sector entities, the entities which are managed and supposed to follow the same pattern which the government is. And the purpose is to mobilize the revenue collections. That's mean taxes. In some cases, it's a different kind of levies at the city level or a province level or at a union council level. So collection of those. So that's the revenue mobilization. Then using those resources for a certain spending, and then account for those funds, and at the end there has to be an audit. So if we look at the structure, so there are a set of rules, systems and processes defined by the government for the revenue collection. For allocating the public fund, you cannot allocate the funds if it's not governed by the certain laws. Like you cannot allocate it for the personal spending. That's just a very crude example there. It has to be allocated to the certain projects or a certain spend categories which are already defined in the rules, and then execute that, actually spend that money for that particular purpose, and then maintain all the records for that fund which shall be available subsequently for audit. So that's the overall PFM if we put together in the context. Why we have to do that, why there's a requirement of a public financial management. So it's bring a certain fiscal discipline. There's a certain legitimacy that whatever is spending, that's as per rule and regulation. It helps to predict what kind of spending may be required, and we will talk about that a little bit. It's bring a transparency and accountability. If you look at this, the relationship between the citizen and the state, that's a contract under which the public, the citizens, they pay certain levies, certain taxes, and the government commit to spend that for citizen services and for the certain expenses of the government, and to maintain a certain relationship as defined by the constitution of those governments. So, for example, it include education, it's include the healthcare side of it, it's include the security, it's include even the right to do business within that country. Everything requires a certain infrastructure as well as certain resources which are spent to maintain that kind of infrastructure within the country, which citizens use as a service. For example, the public school, public universities, access to healthcare. So the public healthcare infrastructure, we talk about the roads, the markets for that matter, and then also governing certain rules. For example, if we talk about the climate action and the environment, then the security in case of the military and everything. So the government is responsible based on that state and citizen relationship, that they have to provide certain services back to the citizens under that contract, where citizens are providing money significantly. That's the primary source. And the government is going to provide certain services against those, against that money. And to make sure that the entire process remain uh, transparent, there are rules and regulation that how the money will be collected and how the citizen services will be delivered. And that requires a certain visibility, certain accountability. So that's the overall process which the PFM, as when we summarize it, this is the PFM process which the government has to deploy. And then over the period, when we look at that, if you see 70, 30 years, 70, 50 years back, there was a different process. And with the technology or evolution of the technology and data availability, there's a lot of digitalization. And if we take the example of Estonia right now, all the citizen services significantly are delivered through the digital media. So that is making it more transparent, more accessible, and that's also ensured a certain reach to every citizen who is sitting in any part of the country for that matter. What is the process itself? So the government has to provide a framework. There's a strategy document, then there are policies. Based on that, the PFM professionals, they define or formulate a budget. The budget is the first document which is defined or determined based on a certain policy. And for the budget formulation, there is always a chart of account, there are head of accounts against which everybody or all the departments, they provide that what kind of projects they are doing, what kind of services they are supposed to deliver, and for that, what kind of cost they will be incurring. That include the salaries, that include all kind of expenses which they have to incur for that. So they prepare a budget against a chart of account, and the chart of account is coming from that set of rules, regulation, laws, and systems which we defined earlier. The second part comes into play, the execution. So in the beginning of the year, you have already created that set of accounts and you have put that budget there, and now it's the execution. Execution may include payment of salaries, execution may include the procurement process, execution may include the spending of that money against a certain invoices, right? So the budget execution means the money is going to be spent now against a certain head, against a certain project. And then there's approval hierarchies, and that's again defined by those set of laws that who can approve what, up to what extent, under which time frame they have to execute that budget. And then it comes to the third part, when we are spending that money, that need to be accounted for, that what that money, on what account that money was spent. There has to be a certain documentation, whether it's a week, like in other corporate world, we call the three-way match. So there's a PO, there's a invoice, there's a delivery. So similar systems exist where those during the execution that generate all kind of evidences, and based on those evidences, government has to record or account for those expenses. We will talk about that, what kind of basis we use, whether we use the cash basis or accrual basis. So we will review a couple of things around it. We will touch upon that. We will not get into the extreme details for those. And then there is a third part come into, that's the external scrutiny and audits. So there was a certain policy. Under that policy framework, we created a budget. Then based on a certain process and authority or delegation of power, we have executed that budget and we have spent that money, we recorded, reported that one. And now it's come the assurance part of it, where the third party or somebody like the auditor general or a national audit office that come into play, and they go through those reports and recorded expenses and create or provide assurance to government. In case of Pakistan, we have a different committees to which they provide those reports, and in case of different countries, there are different legislator or the regulatory authority to which those reports are provided, and they review that how that PFM or the overall public financial management was discharged, the responsibility towards that PFM was discharged, and based on those assurances, that's bring the transparency and the trust between citizens and the state, that everything which they were supposed to do in terms of the public spending, that was done according to the policy, based on the budget, it was recorded properly, and then that's helped and create that political equity within the country, that this government is doing the right thing and they are doing everything as per the process and within the law. And then when we were talking about the accounting, there are different methodologies which different countries have adopted. So there's a cash-based accounting. That's something where everybody is trying to depart from. The cash basis of accounting was a concept where anything where the cash has been or is exchanged, whether you have collected the cash or whether you have spent the cash, that's the trigger for recording. Then there was a modified cash basis of accounting where the revenue was recognized or still recognized based on the cash, but the spending or expenditures are recognized reasonably on an accrual basis. And then there's a modified accrual basis of accounting where everything is going on accrual basis, but there are certain areas where we're still running on a cash. And then there's a full accrual basis of accounting. So currently, the PFM globally is transitioning from a very cash-based accounting to a full accrual-based accounting. And there are certain standards which are being introduced, which are called IPSAS, International Public Sector Accounting Standard. And recently, these standards, the IPSAS board has also introduced or planning to introduce the sustainability standards at the same time. So if we go back to the PFM, every money or every penny we are spending, that is directed towards a certain outcome or a certain output. Based on those output or outcome, the impact is evaluated. And you will see, or you must be hearing a lot around the performance audits, like, okay, we have spent the money which we were supposed to spend. It's as per the process, what the process was, but whether that money was able to generate the right kind of impact. So this is always a question mark. Previously, in historically, most of the audits were done more on a financial audit or a compliance audit sense, but now we are moving towards the more performance audit side of it. The outcomes and the quality of outcomes that PFM is generating, that is becoming a key question as of today when we talk about these things. SDG is another area which is important for governments now. There are 245 variables which government has to track and report back how they are doing on these 17 SDGs, where right now all countries have committed to. So if the countries have made that commitments, they have to generate that visibility by 2030, what kind of targets they have committed and how they are tracking that. So the PFM has got a certain link with SDGs, and those are also becoming a part of the reportings. And that's why the performance audit becoming more and more important, because these are the global commitments which countries are making, and the assurance that whether we are moving towards that or our direction of the journey is right or not, this is where the audit come into play, and their reports create that level of confidence and trust that our budgets are helping us to spend money in a way that we are moving towards achieving those SDGs. And the assurance is provided by either a third party or the National Audit Office or Auditor General of those countries. Then PIFA is another important framework. So PIFA is the framework which evaluate the overall financial accountability within the country. So it's a public expenditure and financial accountability. There are 7 pillars and 31 different variables or components which are assessed. And PIFA is becoming more a global pattern or a framework based on which the effectiveness of the PFM or effectiveness of the public spending is being evaluated. And there is a certain weighting mechanism where it's grade that how good or bad a certain part of that PFM is performing or performed in the past, and what are the remedial measure a government is supposed to take, and whether they are doing that or not. So I think that's where there's a internal within the country, there's an internal framework under which the PFM is conducted or performed, and then there's a global framework available to evaluate the situation in a one country versus other countries. So PIFA is a very good framework. I always encourage people who are working in a public sector that do review that PIFA framework and look at that the different reports they are producing. It helps individual to really evaluate which country is doing better and why, and what can be replicated or done in their country or within their own government or their entities to improve a little bit around the PFM on a different pillars or even at a different component level. So there are 31 components which are linked with the different pillars. So those pillars are the broader categories, and the rating is happening at a component level. So you can have a different kind of rating, but it helps you to do the comparison between one country and another country. So before we move to the report, any question at this stage? Let me have a quick look at the questions. No question yet. Okay, so we move towards, Arun, please do interrupt where you have any question or you spot any question there. So I'll keep running this one. Now, this is a very interesting statement made in 2020. It matters enormously whether your country has a good health service, competent bureaucrats, and sound finance. Good government is the difference between living and dying. So how you live your life is going to come through those governance pillar which a government is going to deploy. How they really create those health services, education services, and how they do spend the money, and on what they spend the money, and whether they are able to generate those kind of outputs and outcomes, or whether at the time of budgeting outcomes and outputs were also a part of it, and there was a linkage and a clear linkage was generated. That will ultimately determine that what kind of environment we will be living in. Just on the research side, the report which I'm going to share with you, that report is basically based on how well have government responded to pandemic, and that's reflect the effectiveness and the efficiency to respond to a certain crisis. What are the future challenges for PFM arrangements? These are the questions which were taken out, and those were answered via global member surveys. So a lot of 1,500 plus ACCA member have responded. There were 3 public finance roundtable. There was semi-structured expert interview, and there's a lot of PFM literature which was reviewed. So if we look at some of the results we will be sharing here, the one thing which came out very, very strong, government had to think fast. And that's when you say government and the word fast, normally that's not something which we use in the same sentence. But pandemic has highlighted that a government had to think fast about what to do and then act fast. Then another second fast we are seeing in the same sentence to deliver. So the speed, the pace, that's something which was highlighted, that in case of crisis, government have to act fast. Whether all the governments manage to do that, maybe not. But there are a lot of governments which manage to respond it fast beyond what they imagined before pandemic, that they can literally act that fast. So there were governments who have responded according to the need, and they were surprised by themselves with the quality of talent they had and how quickly talent really came up with the processes and the system to really honor that state and citizen relationship and deliver those services in a different mode and very quickly. So that transition which took place was literally in a very, very short time. So that's why today, when we use the word governments, think fast, act fast in the same sentence, we have got enough evidence that's where the well is. We have seen the governments responding in that way. So they were agile, they were determined, but often had to bend or stretch their PFM system to achieve their objective. And when we say stretch, we are not talking about going beyond the law or outside the law. It's basically quickly changing those laws and bringing those processes in line, what was required at that time to really deliver on those objectives. We can see a regional differences about the effectiveness of government in dealing with COVID. So if you look at the developed world, you will see that if you look at the North America or Middle East or Western Europe or even Asia Pacific, the most of the respondents were satisfied with from the North America, it was the highest one. But as soon as we get into the South Asia, Caribbean, or a Central Eastern Europe, where the infrastructure is not as big or not as digital as in the developed world, we see that the people were not very satisfied or reasonably satisfied with the effectiveness of the government in dealing with COVID-19. It does not reflect the effectiveness of the government in general. It's a very specific question dealing with pandemic and the crisis at a certain stage. The wealth of the country makes a difference. So advanced economy with the 15% of GDP versus emerging economy versus low income economies, I think there was a difference that how they managed to really spend that kind of money. So the people who have got a better money, better infrastructure, you will find the better response there as well. But is it the case everywhere? No, there are small economies who have responded it well, but those are the exceptions which we see. And the wealth was not only factor, so availability of fund was not the only factor. Some country did not have the infrastructure for moving jobs online, and that was the biggest hurdle in most of the countries where the infrastructure which is available was not good enough, where the government employees can work from home. In a lot of cases, they do not have laptops, they do not have the access to internet, or they may not have access to the system online. So that's what the one hurdle which the countries who have a poor infrastructure have faced. Internet access and reliability, insufficient skill. I think that's again an interesting dynamic where the people are not that tech savvy in some countries, and it's across the board. So a lot of people who have infrastructure or access to internet and systems, but they were not skilled enough to work in isolation or work from home. So that's also one of a challenge which we have seen. Uh, there's another a challenge where the government or may have access and the digital infrastructure, but the citizens, the communities who were supposed to receive those services did not have that capacity or capability to receive those services digitally. So if you look at the components, so it's not only the wealth, the significant component is coming from the accessibility and how digital that country or how tech savvy those citizens are. And then we look at the transparency in terms of the responses, and that's particularly, again, a very much in a COVID scenario. It's not reflecting the government in general, and that's a PFM scenario. So in that particular scenario, we are seeing transparency quite high in terms of Middle East and North America and reasonable on a Western Europe. But as soon as it's come to the Asia Pacific, where there was a certain level of satisfaction, a little less than 10%, but from a transparency perspective, we are seeing more challenges. And then it's come to South Asia, to Africa, we are seeing a various responses starting from a 21% to 47%, where the transparency was question mark in terms of the spending which was done on a pandemic side. And that's where the learning comes into play. So if in a crisis, we have seen a different character and the different responses from the government, and we have seen something which was not imaginable before that crisis, this is the opportunity for us, particularly the public sector professionals, that how they can leverage, learn, replicate, and make sure that those things which and the good things which they have done in a crisis, they can make it a permanent part of their everyday job. And the main areas for development of PFM which were identified is the transparency and accountability is the first one. And when we say transparency, that means there has to be a defined rules and regulation. And if there's any change, there has to be a reason, and the changes should be visible as well. And based on that, it create, again, go back to the fundamental. PFM is a primary source to maintain a certain trust between state and citizen relationship, and that's also for the government. It's generate the political equity. More transparency, accountability, that's bring the political equity. So there's a reason, political reason, and there's a financial reason to have a right kind of a PFM infrastructure, and then transparency and accountability of that spending. Prioritization also something which was identified as the area for development. Risk management, I think that's something where historically in the PFM, specifically in a developing world, it's not a risk management mechanism, or the risk management mechanism is not embedded well within the PFM. It's more around the projects and the spending side of it, rather than looking at the longer term picture and looking at the risk management itself. Service delivery and outcome, that's a one demand which keep coming out, that how we can ensure that the state and citizen relationship is determined through the quality of services and the quality of the outcome which PFM is generating. And the visibility of that quality is also important. The communication of that quality is also important. So what was delivered and what was the quality, the people should be able to understand that quality and the spending level. So again, goes back to the transparencies and communication. Accrual accounting and budgeting, I think that's a very hot topic right now globally, that how we can really move faster to accrual side. Otherwise, the spending which governments have done during the pandemic, they have consumed a lot of future revenue. And that's if not spending is not accrued correct, or it's not allocated to the future revenue which they have really consumed, it's very difficult to predict that the spending and the lending which exists today, how it's going to be paid off in future. So accrual accounting is becoming more relevant, and the crisis has also taught us that. E-procurement and the open contracting data standard, I think that's another important area. 30% of the government spending goes through the procurement process, and there are organization and there are standards or open source data which is available to really review and compare that whatever we are trying to procure, how it's looked like or comparable to something which is happening other part of the same country or in other countries at the same time. So e-procurement also came out as one of a key development area. Just to give you some stats around why PFM is important, almost 33% of the global workforce is working in a working in public sector, and almost the similar percentage, like 30 to 33% of the global GDP is generated through the public spending, overall spending, right? So that's how the public spending constitute the GDP. So if we are not managing or creating a visibility or a right kind of visibility and accountability around the 33% of the GDP of the world, we can well imagine what are we going to miss. So that's why it's important to understand what we have learned in pandemic and the what good things which we have seen there, and how we can replicate and make sure whatever the PIFA assessment we have received in 20 or early 20, the PIFA assessment which we receive in 2022 or 23, there should be a certain progress. Transparency, government could have done more about the oversight during the crisis. So there are a lot of scandals which we are seeing around the world, that where the money was supposed to spend and that was supposed to, from a recipient perspective, who should have received that money versus what happened actually on ground. There was a certain challenge. So oversight during that crisis was a one challenge. Public and staff confidence, I think that's where the professionalism, the talent, the training, the qualification, everything comes into play, that how confident that team is when they have to really create a reform structure in a very small time. So again, the government thinking fast, acting fast, require that kind of confidence which comes from the quality of people which are being deployed in the PFM system. Uh, I think that was a very interesting area, which is the remit and resources of the supreme audit institution, like the National Audit Office or Auditor General, that how SAIs are going to perform and what kind of resources they require and what they can audit and can't audit within the crisis. So improving that transparency and the accountability also require a certain quality resources within the SAIs and redefining or reviewing their remit, whether, like, there are a lot of countries who are debating whether the performance audit is a remit for SAIs or it's a compliance audit or a financial audit only. So I think these are the kind of question it has generated. But I think this remit has to move towards the performance either way. Reason being is the SDGs and the outcome, and most importantly, the trust between the citizen and state is based on not what has been delivered, but the quality of that service and what it was supposed to deliver. I think that's the key comparison based on what citizens review the performance of those governments. I think that's a love from Joe Biden, that show me your budget and I'll tell you what you value. So when we are doing a prioritization, there could be a lot of talk. We can talk about that, what is important and what is not important, but the budget allocation itself clearly reflect that where you are putting your resources. Is it aligned with your policy and the statements you are making at a government level or at the state level, at the national or subnational government level? And are you allocating enough resources and budget towards that? The governments have to make choices, so they can't do everything in a 1 year, but whether on longer term they are planning it right. So they have to make a choices in a short term, but they are supposed to deliver everything on a longer period. So whether the direction of the journey is right or not, that assurance comes from SAIs, and that is significantly based on the performance and the milestones which the government is supposed to achieve through that spending versus what they have achieved. So I think that's becoming again an important debate globally, and that should be a debate within our institutions, public sector institutions, whether we are making those debates and how we are taking it forward. And again, like I mentioned earlier, the spending which has been done and during the pandemic is going to impact the future budget. Just giving you certain examples, that a lot of amount which was borrowed and spent, that's mean it will have a pressure of interest payment or principal payments on the future budgets. And can consider alternatives to incremental budgeting. I think that's also one of the important areas, that how we should do the budget and how we are looking for the resources to really account for that kind of spending. So what are the alternatives to the incremental budgets? So should we go back to the 0-1 or a very, very balanced budget type of stuff? Is it possible given the resources and everything? So I think there are different frameworks for the budgeting available. Incremental budget is a one of them. So whatever you have spent last year, you are just going to increase a certain amount and keep doing the same thing. So that's the time where we have to challenge it, maybe in certain cases, on a zero-based budget. So start with the outputs and the outcomes which we want to generate and budget it accordingly. Risk management, again, that came out as one of the area that how competent the PFM professionals are in understanding the risk, particularly in a short time. Again, the word government, think fast, act fast, mean they are higher risk because the things will not be debated, and the legislation which we are going to use or changes in the legislation which we are introducing, that may not be as well thought out as we would see in a normal life. So the risk management and the appetite of the risk and handling those risks and the mitigation or a potential mitigation which could have been considered, those were not debated, considered, or accounted for that quickly as we would like to. So that's been certain profiles in terms of the risk management and the talent for the risk management. That's also fine as one of a development area where the governments can work better. Response plans, so there has to be a like the business continuity plans, or there's a response plans which we call in a certain crisis management. So those response plan should be developed in advance. Risk impact is also a deciding factor in the investment priorities. So identifying, again, going back to the fundamental of risk management. Digitalization of services, I think that's a one area which came out very, very strong, that whether on a recipient side or even on the government side, on both sides, how they can create and receive services digitally. And then this is the opportunity for accountants to really go back, review, learn, and share how things can be improved. And there's enough evidence around the globe that the things can be improved, and it could be done in a different way, which normally we don't think or reject as a baseline. So I think those are the areas where we have seen people have done wonderful job, and those are the learning and sharing areas. We always encourage the case studies from those can be used in a different countries, and they can start adopting, adapting, or at least moving towards those. Service delivery, again, that came out as a strong point. The service delivery and the outcome, that's where the performance audits are going. That's where the budgeting process in a policy level and the budget formulation level, that's the area which is coming out very, very strong, that what services we are supposed to deliver, what kind of outputs or outcome we are supposed to generate, and linking it back with the budgets. I think that's the one area which highlighted, and there are different frameworks, different ways to do that. It's also important one. I think another area which came out strong is the value for money is one of PFM objective, but has it fallen behind the sustaining the economy and resource allocation? A big question mark. We will see that in the coming years, that the amount which was spent during that pandemic, how it's going to create the long-term value. SDGs, how we can really achieve those, and effective service delivery around it. Accrual accounting, again, most of you are accountant, you understand that the cash-based accounting does not reflect the right situation, and accrual accounting is the one where you can start seeing the value or a balance sheet of the country. There are a lot of challenges so far, like if you have to really account for the mining resources of the country, what the value you are going to put there, the valuation issues. But still, there are a lot of areas which can move to the accrual more easily in the next 3 to 5 years if we plan today, and we can start moving towards the IPSAS or adoption of IPSAS and creating the resources in the system which help us to really see the full picture of the government spending and the resources. So that's something which is, I think, again, comes back to accountant, how convinced they are, how ready they are, how they will drive that agenda in the country. They are already, I think, 50 plus countries who are supposed to be on accrual accounting by 2025. So there are countries who have already started their journey and they are achieving their journey. So again, meanwhile, like I said, if we start our direction of the journey, then the balance sheet approach is the one way we can start. E-procurement, like we highlighted, 30% of the government spending is on contract. So is there a competitive e-procurement process which can be or is deployed within the government or not? That's also bring the transparencies and the accountability. But most importantly, e-procurement process ensures the continuity of procurement. If that procurement process is not digitized, that's mean then in any such crisis, a lot of procurement cannot take place. We cannot procure digitally. We cannot deliver digitally. So that's one of the hindrance or a roadblock for any government to respond to a certain crisis. So there's an efficiency question, there's an effectiveness question, there's a transparency question. But I think from a system perspective and availability of applications and data, that's already there. It's more around planning it, putting together it's in a plan which can move the current procurement process to e-procurement in next 3 to 5 years. I think that was identified as a wonderful opportunity again. So there's another interesting statement, and I love this statement, by the way. The existing and the future PFM systems are only as good as the people who operate and manage them. So it's not around what are the laws, what are the systems, and what are the processes. It's all about how you deploy those recruit, retain, and develop those quality people who have to use that system, law, and processes. If those people are good, they would help the governments to evolve it, those system processes and the laws according to the situation and the need. And it will become more future oriented. It would become more delivery oriented or outcome oriented or impact oriented, because that's how people think. And the process, laws, and system help them to do that. And the people really help to make those changes which are required in the law system or processes according to the need. So it's the quality of people who end of the day determine the PFM systems. And if we talk about the future proof PFM system, we are talking about the professionalization of existing team, as well as creating a pipeline of professionals who come and join the PFM. And we have to excite them. I think the recognized challenge is that whether the public sector jobs and are attractive enough to really help recruit that kind of talent or retain the existing talent. I think that's the biggest challenge right now. Whether the PFM system or the public sector jobs or provide enough opportunities to public sector professionals to retain them and to help them develop at the same time. So there is enough incentive in the system to develop people. So these are the key questions which we raised from a university side as well, from an educator side as well, how they can channelize that kind of pipeline and talent toward the public sector, which is basically 30% plus of the global GDP. So if we look at the importance and impact perspective, it's very, very big. But if we look from the attractiveness perspective, that's still a question mark in most of the countries. So from a challenges perspective, it comes down to professionals to take responsibility for their own development. So if we are working in a public sector, given the impact it's generate for citizen, it's important that we take that accountability and responsibility. Am I doing enough to develop myself? Am I creating my enough influence within the country and the department to make those changes? Is my voice loud enough and is being heard? So I think it starts from a professional technical talent, and it's also include a lot of soft skills, whether I'm able to engage and bring my point out and drive it. So these are the questions which comes to the professional. The status of the finance professional within the public sector. So again, from a from an incentive perspective, from a progression perspective, from an influence perspective, I think this is again a question. Uh, how much government is investing into PFM people and the processes and the systems itself? And again, the pipeline, like I raised that, how we can attract new talent to come and join public sector. Is it enough juice within the public sector which can really understand the requirement of Gen Z and provide such an environment where these people can thrive, they can contribute, they can drive those changes? So if you look at the overall recommendations, there are 20 recommendations which came out in the report. There are 10 recommendations which are covering PFM systems and processes, that what need to be done on those sides. But the 11 recommendations are all about the public finance professional and their capabilities, that what kind of people we need, how those people can help improve the capabilities, and how those people can then drive those changes or recommendation which exist for the PFM systems and processes. So here I'll take a break, and I think we will encourage to go back to questions here, and we take it forward from there. So Harun, over to you. I'll take a break there.
Okay, Sajid, there aren't many questions at the moment. We can ask participants to raise hands if they have any questions to ask. So anybody who wants to ask a question, either type it in the questions box or otherwise raise your hand and I can unmute you so you can ask your question in person. And Sajid, if they're not asking questions, I think our opportunity to ask them questions. So we can always take advantage. Okay. Okay. Anybody Any questions? No, Sajid, I don't think if either people are typing or otherwise they don't have any question to ask. So yes, we have our Salan Munawar, one hand raised, but then lowered.
Okay, I think I'll raise one question here. How many people are working in a public sector right now who are actually working in the public sector? If you can just put yes, no, yes in case of you are working in a public sector in the question dialogue. Yeah, that's great. Okay, great. So people like Arslan Munawar, I can see that. So Arslan, you are working in a public sector. What kind of challenge you face? Uh, आपको क्या challenge आता है on an everyday basis? Or if you want to share your feedback while you are working there without naming the organization for sure. Arslan, if you're willing to share your experience, or Umair, if you are willing to share your experience. Rizwan Arif has raised a question that our professionals are against the public sector job. How could public sector input great people like us? So, Rizwan, thank you for that question. We will ask Arslan if Arslan is willing to share here.
Sajid, I can unmute Arsalan if his device is working, and he can maybe discuss it here rather than
Yeah,
typing
yeah,
it.
that's what I would suggest, that if you can bring people on here.
I think Arsalan's internet connectivity is not helping him. He's gone offline.
Okay. So we have a one question which is more around the people are against the public sector. I wouldn't use the word Rizwan against. I think currently the way for the last 5-10 years, globally we are facing a major challenge in terms of the availability of talent, and that has changed the perspective of a lot of young people. They can find uh, jobs in the private sector, or they can find the work in a freelance, which is more rewarding in terms of financial rewards or a material rewards perspective. It may not provide the similar job security with most of the time the government sector does, but the government sector so far is unable for those secure jobs or a permanent job. They are unable to offer that kind of compensation. Although in a lot of government sector we have seen in a recent past, in the last 4 or 5 years, of that they are offering the contractual jobs on a market based salaries, but those are the contractual ones. That's a one part. The second part, and that was an interesting conversation we were having in another uh, uh, call recently in Africa. We were talking about the PFM. It's the risk and the responsibilities which is associated with the public sector in terms of the legal cases and the accountability if something goes wrong. So this is another area where the people sometimes are not as they don't go and join the public sector. So the one is a compensation. The second comes into in terms of the risk which is associated with that. But the people who are working in a public sector, I think they can tell you a lot around it, that if you are following the process and the system and the law, the risk is not there. The risks start coming in when you try to do something which is not defined by the system or the process. So that's an important element. From a reward and the risk perspective, there are jobs, maybe contractual right now, which offers the market-based salaries, and that basically take care of that compensation. Public sector, the biggest advantage of the public sector is the type of impact you can generate for your fellow citizen while you are sitting there. But at the same time, definitely we have to think about the financial compensation and the risk associated with that. So the decision making for the private job versus the public sector job may have a different criteria to evaluate. I know a lot of people in a private sector, they are not very happy how the honor manager is treating them versus what kind of respect they can gain within the public sector. So there are different risks and reward which are associated in the public sector and the private sector, but just outrightly rejecting the public sector or using the word the professionals are against the public sector may not be the should not be a sweeping statement. There should be a proper evaluation of the role or opportunity before you accept or reject that. So there are pros and cons both on a private sector and a public sector. So just not considering a public sector is not a very good option in terms of the decision making.
Sajid,
Culture.
sorry, Umair Khalid has raised his hand and he's unmuted now. So you can, but at the same time, there are a lot of people who are now contributing putting in their thoughts in the questions box. You can have a look at them as well. And
Sure, I'm looking at that.
yeah. So Umair, in the meanwhile, if you want to unmute yourself, I have unmuted your mic. You can.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Assalamu alaikum.
Can you hear me? Sound pare?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Umair का मेरा ख्याल है वही disconnectivity का issue है. जी Umair, we can hear you. Please continue. It keeps disappearing.
Hello.
Umair, your internet connectivity is very poor. No, I don't think Umair will be able to speak.
There's another comment that the idea of working in a public sector demotivates me, considering the type of work culture predominant there. Also, the recruitment system is very old school, the CSS, PCS type examination. Definitely, these are the challenges, and uh, some challenges and the experiences we see there in a public sector is way different than the other. There are a lot of public sector entities from a Pakistan experience, I can tell you, which offer a very good career progression. But those are the entities which are a little bit different, or they are structured differently. Roles in the ministries, within the ministries, some of the roles are very fulfilling, and the work environment there is very good. But I think people have got all kind of experiences, but those are not limited to public sector. Those experiences exist in a private sector as well. But any sector is as good as their people are. So what kind of people are there and what kind of people want to join that will always determine that how that sector will be, or the culture of that sector will reflect in future. There's a question from Mohammed Suleiman Simab. Harun, I would like you to pick that question. Is ACCA Pakistan coordinating with Ministry of Finance and other government institution regarding updation of the financial rules and induction of ACCA in public sector? I think you have got some updates, Harun, you can share. Otherwise, let me know. I can share.
Did you go on?
Sorry?
You go on, I think.
Okay. So, ACCA Pakistan is engaged with all ministries and the government institutions and talking about that what need to change. There are a lot of institutions which have already included ACCA as an entry qualification at a different level. There is still a challenge which we have seen or accounted for in a recent past, which is more around the progression rules within the employment regulation or the service rules. And there is a certain conversation going on with a certain department which have got impact across other departments to make certain changes in terms of the progression rules as well. From a recruitment perspective, it's already there. From a progression perspective, there are changes. Government has made certain changes in 2 or 3 years back as well, and we are anticipating and expecting there will be more changes in the coming years, where ACCA, or if you use generically, the people who are professionally qualified, they will have a better opportunity to progress compared to who are not. Mohammed Suleiman is also working in a public sector. So Mohammed Suleiman, if you want to share your experience, what are the good and bad experiences, what your fellow members are talking about here, if you can share something with them, that would be a good guidance. Suleiman Simab.
Suleiman, I've unmuted you. You can unmute your mic and speak.
Okay. I have worked almost 2.5 years in the Controller General of Accounts Office as a senior auditor. So working there was quite difficult, not only just for me, but for ACMAs and other professional accountants as well, because the people who actually control the department are CSPs. I mean, uh, the people who have come through CSS. These people mostly do not have financial background. They either have MS in zoology or botany or something, and then they pass on the competitive exam and come to that department, get allocated to that department. They do read financial rules in the but they read specifically the cash-based accounting system. So it was quite difficult to make them understand what the accrual accounting system is and how things in this department. And also, it was quite difficult for to explain to them the contradictions in the financial rules. I mean, there are a lot of financial rules available, and they are disparate. They are not compiled into one form, which someone can easily refer to. And even the rules which have been compiled, they have a lot of anomalies in that. So I don't think so anybody is working on updation or you can say systematic changes in those financial rules to make them compatible with the private sector so that can become more efficient.
Thank you, Salman. I think one area which we always, or sometimes we tend to miss out on, that the maximum uh, compensation as an individual in a public sector is not towards the employee of the public sector, it's towards the consultant and the specialist who are working with the public sector. So when you look at the public sector career, it's not necessarily come as a job alone. There is a lot of consulting based assignments which are available with a very good pay rates, and there are a lot of development agencies who are working towards that, and that's require again a different kind of network. But from working with understanding the public sector or PFM itself, and then working with the public sector as a consultant, that offers a very rewarding career. And this is also one of our dimension specifically need to be considered if you are looking for a career option. So there are a lot of people globally, and ACCA members itself, there are, ACCA is one of our organization or a PAO who has got the highest number of members and the future member working in a public sector. It's over 60,000 people. And the type of knowledge base and the network exists out there that can help people to get into the consulting role rather than a job role. So I think both options have got their own merit and demerit. But the countries where you have a more struggle in terms of the permanent job, their service structure or compensation structure, which may not be as lucrative as their consulting payment, which may reach from anywhere between the $200 a day to $5,000 a day. And those kind of special assignments, those are also something which comes to the public sector and with the network within the public sector. So anybody who has got that kind of experience to work as a consultant, rather than looking only from a job perspective.
Yes, I have mentioned that consultancy work or state-owned enterprises do offer some good remuneration. But if you look at the financial structure of our country, the ultimate say the finance secretary or the people who come through that competitive exam, they have the ultimate usually say in financial matters. And I am hopeful that financial public sector will become better because a lot of people we were recruited in 2000 a batch of 700 people, and a lot of people who got recruited in that batch were either ACMAs or ACCAs or CA inter. So I am hopeful that once these people get promotions that come at better position, then the situation will get better. Right now, the seniors we are working with are either just masters, which is not relevant to the finance, or they have just simple BA or other simple degrees. So probably once the professional accountants come up in these organizations, they will get better within the next 10 to 20 days, 20 years, sorry.
I think fast and act fast can bring it into days, Salman, definitely. If that's highlighted at the right time and the right people. Uh, Advocacy itself is a big area while you are within the public sector. Advocacy always help you to really create your narrative and then build that narrative and get people around that narrative, which can help you to make those changes. So it's an important element. So if you're working in a public sector or you are planning to work in a public sector, again, like Salman said, there are certain changes which are expected. It may take longer than what we expect in a private sector, but there's always an opportunity to engage with the public sector as a consultant. Public sector is again, like we mentioned, they are the one who hire consultants a lot and the specialists a lot, just because of the challenge which Salman was talking about. That's create an opportunity there to work as a specialist, as a business, as a consultant there, rather than work within the system, work alongside the system. Uh, that's another side of the opportunity, because they do not have enough professionals right now. So most of the time they are dependent on the professional. And just to give you the size that what does it mean? So just a project which, if I remember correctly, uh, there are numbers who run in billion of dollars, which donor agencies and the World Banks and the type of World Banks and other agencies who are spending in Pakistan on the PFM, and that money is going to the consultants significantly, or acquiring the equipment or professionalization in terms of trainings and stuff. So there's a lot of effort and money which is going in there. It's not a bad time to explore public sector, starting with as a consultant, and if you find it comfortable, you can go and join them, or you can join them as a on the contract. But the question is, you are looking for a compensation, so what you have to offer to them, are you prepared enough? Do you have a right kind of network for public sector? Whether you are familiar with PFM as a system, what's happening in the rest of the world, and how you compare the PIFA assessment. Even PIFA hire people to do those assessment. Even the big fours and the audit firms are working with either with the donor side or a government side to deliver different projects. And any project which is done by the government, PFM is always a part of it. Uh, Public sector jobs are available on HCCA careers as well. Public sector jobs are in Pakistan, the countries like Pakistan, those are advertised in the newspaper. There's a process how they can advertise jobs and how they can run the recruitment system. Again, it's a public sector, so there are rules and regulation which determine that how the things are done. So there's not a single platform. There are different websites which talk about the public sector job, but all public sector jobs are advertised. Like a private sector goes with the reference and all that, but the public sector procurement process is significantly driven through the public advertisement. And there's a process. It's a long process, but there's a process based on which they hire. Like there was somebody mentioned CSS and PCS itself is a process to really do that assessment and bring people on board. So yes, there's always a public sector jobs which are advertised, and you can Google those one. But the question is not that what job is available, whether you are ready to do that job. Do you have the right kind of skill and understanding of the public sector, which is different from private sector, or anybody in a public sector who wants to transition to the private sector. There are a lot of resources available on ACCA career to help you understand how that transitioning is going to work. But first, I would say anybody who is looking at public sector, try to understand where the opportunity is and in which role those opportunity exist. Otherwise, if you look at the different service rules at a provincial level, they varies as well. Federal level rules are different. So I think that create the complexity around bringing a consistency across the country for certain rules. So sometimes the subnational governments have a different rules versus the federal government. So where you should be looking at for the job or assignment as a consultant, that's always requires a certain kind of research there.
I would add something else, Sajeed. I think from my experience, I can say that financial rules are more or less same in the provinces as well as in the federal government. So our friends are working with the as well, and they are following provincial rules. They are more or less copy of the federal government rules. So they are not much different. There are slight differences, but they are not a lot of differences in that. I mean, they are not huge differences.
No, my stress was on a service rule, the compensation side of it, like the qualification allowance, the
Yeah.
progression rule, the salary level. That has got a slight differences among the different segment within the government as well. So who follow what? Ideally, the federal rules should be the one prevailing on everything else. But since 18th Amendment, there are a lot of things which has changed, and not necessarily the federal rules, service rules are applicable to everything which they do.
Yes.
Uh, Umar Abdal is talking about the security of the job. So generally, the public sector, the permanent jobs are secure as compared to the private sector, because again, there is a legislation based on which you are recruited, and there is a legislation based on which you can be asked to leave. And it's very difficult to really fire somebody within the public sector, because there's a certain process, and most of the time you must have seen that a lot of cases, even the contractual employee working with the public sector, somebody tried to fire them, they went in court and they were reinstated. So these are very normal cases. So from a job security perspective, yes, that's offer certain security, and based on that security offering, if they are willing, or most of the people are willing to work on a lesser pay or lesser compensation, because other jobs have got a higher risk. So that low risk in terms of uh, the job security side of it, so people do compromise in terms of the financial return. But these again are the choices different people make in based on a different criteria. But yes, from a security perspective and from a pension perspective, the government jobs are more secure. But we have seen that a lot of people who are working on the salary level which are higher than the general private sector level, like we know a lot of people who are working on 1 million a month, and those are there, and they are working on a 5-year contract or something, but they don't have pension, they don't have any other benefit, they don't have a job security, but they have got a good compensation. So there are different examples which exist out there. So Harun, if you don't have any specific question for PFM related or a report related, so I would suggest we can wait for another 5 minutes and we can close this session.
Yes, sounds good. I think most of the people were concerned about the the organizational practices and mainly around recruitment and compensation practices in the public sector. Um, well, on a tangent to the topic, but I think this webinar did give them an opportunity to vent out their feelings. Um, Anybody has any specific questions about PFM, the topic? Umar Sheikh, just a second, Suleiman. The presentation, Umar Sheikh, is uploaded as the handout. So you can download it from there if you like. Umar Sheikh. Yes, Suleiman, you were saying something?
Yes, and also I want to add 1 or 2 more points.
Please go on.
Okay. One thing what I have noticed over the years while working in the public sector is that there is dearth of people who are professionally qualified. I mean, not only professionally qualified, but usually the public sector is has I mean less staff for people to come because a lot of work as the person who is working gets burdened with a lot of work. So a lot of vacancies available in the public sector. So that's I think so people should focus and come. But usually what happens is that people do not qualify the tests or they fail the interview. They do not show the proper reason why they do want to work in the public sector because financially it is not rewarding. Even in my interview, I was asked that why you want to switch to the public sector, get less pay. But when I showed my enthusiasm and my altruism to them, then they said okay, that's good. So I think so. Somewhat altruism is required if you really want to work for a permanent job. Otherwise, consultancy or state-owned enterprises are good, provide very lucrative benefits to professionally qualified people, but they do not offer regular or permanent jobs. The other thing I want to add is it is a specific issue that I have also asked in the Pakistani taxation as well, the anomaly about house acquisition. I mean, is providing benefit, federal government actually is providing benefit to its employees if they are working in the provincial or federal headquarters of house acquisition. You can either get a house allotted, a government house allotment. Then there is another option that you can get a house rented by government will pay rent for that house. So in the case of allotment, people will deduct, rent, which is very minimal. In case of rent, there are also three scenarios. One is that government either will pay rent to the third party or to the owner of the house. If you own the house and you are living in your own house, then government will pay rent directly to you. And if you get the power of attorney for that house, then even then government will pay directly to you. Then there are some government departments in which government is not paying house requisition. Instead, they directly through that process, they directly pay house requisition instead of house rent allowance in their salaries, like National Highway and Motorway. These people do not have to get through the paperwork; they directly get their benefit in their salaries. The problem here is that when government is paying in the salary, then government is as employment benefit and deducting tax as employment benefit, income tax. And if government is paying rent to the third party or to the employee itself, acquisition process, then government is not treating it as an employment benefit. It is treating it as the rental income and deducting tax, which is property tax. So that is an anomaly. So these kind of things, when I discuss with and try to, uh, ask them, then that government should devise a process or plan where these anomalies can be resolved. It is quite difficult. I think so. NCCA can work on that, but for it to work on it, NCCA will require data, which I have, that how many people are getting employed by the federal government, how many people are getting house acquisition, and how much tax government is collecting, and if government pays all its employees that house acquisition as in the salary slip as an employment benefit, then how much more tax government can collect? Because if the government will pay everybody through the salary slip, then government will definitely collect more tax. So for that proposal, we need numbers, and that numbers can only.
Salman, sorry. Thank you very much. I think it's a great input, but I think the current session, when we are talking about the PFM, I think this is a little digression, but I think from a budget session, I'm sure Harun will be approaching everybody for the budget preparation and uh, the suggestion. I think these are the suggestion which we can use for the budget side of it. So budget is just
Okay.
2 months away, right? But just make sure you don't miss out that opportunity, and do include that. I think with if we don't have any further questions, uh, I would suggest my suggestion would be that do read about the public sector, particularly people who are not very familiar with it. There are opportunities. I would say that rather than looking at the job side, start looking at the opportunity as a consultant, uh, and look at the consultants profile who are working in there, and those are sometimes very young people with the right kind of expertise and their earning level. You will be surprised that how the governments or a public sector, not only in Pakistan, outside Pakistan as well, how they engage and compensate the consultant who work on a certain specialization or or certain technical areas. The hot topics these days for the governments are PFM reforms, how they can change that one, sustainability, implementation of technology for PFM, the data and the analytics, how they can really create the visibility, performance audit. These are the hot topics. So I think looking at those areas is definitely can help you to look at the opportunity differently, and what kind of skill set and the network it may require. Again, like I always say, things will not start moving unless until you plan it well and then executing that plan. So if you would like to evaluate or enter into that space, do understand that space, plan your first 30-90 days, what kind of steps you can take, and then network again helps you to really gauge or access that kind of consulting assignment. So thank you very much for attending today. And thank you, Salman. Thank you very much for sharing your experiences. Don't let that budget proposition go away. Make sure that you share it with Harun, and we can include from ACC side in a budget proposal. Thank you very much for that. It's a valid observation, and it can help uh, really in terms of what can be changed and how from a process side it can help improve the taxation. So thank you very much. Over to you, Harun.
Thank you very much, Sajid, and thank you for bringing this up. I'm actually collating all the budget proposals at the moment. So if you have a proposal to submit, I have already circulated the template. Please submit it as soon as possible because we are right now in the process of preparing our budget proposal. So don't wait on it immediately. Compile your proposal and send it to me through email as soon as possible, please. All right, I think with that, we'll call it a day. I'll give you your half an hour back. Thank you very much for joining in. I hope you enjoyed the session. I hope you found the discussion interesting, useful, forward-looking. Take care of yourselves, and Allah Hafiz.